Hello and welcome back to another episode of Energy Enablers, the show from Foresight Climate and Energy that highlights the people, policies and technologies that are driving the energy transition forward. I'm your host Sam Morgan, and on the show today we're delving into a topic that is essential for everything we talk about in the energy system and wider society. It's data. Good data allows us to change the world. Bad data or bad access to data holds us back, hinders progress, and can even be damaging. When it comes to operating power and energy networks, that also holds true. Good data and good access to data enables better efficiency, cost savings, and anticipatory maintenance and repairs. So how do utilities use data? What kind of technologies are enabling the use of better data? And what kind of evolution is the data space going through? To answer these questions and more, I'm joined on the show today by two guests. Janet Henkai is Principal Program Manager for the Pacific Gas and Electric Aerial and Specialized Inspections Program. And Mauricio Subieta is North American Chief Technology Officer for Nokia Energy's Network Infrastructure Digital Industries Division. Hope you enjoy what I found to be a fascinating discussion. So, Janet, Mauricio, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the podcast. It's one I've been looking forward to for a while because here at Foresight Climate and Energy, we've rapidly realized over our extensive coverage of the energy transition that data seems to be the key to pretty much everything. If we have good data, we can achieve lots of amazing things together and, hit all of those climate goals, energy goals, all that great stuff that we include in our coverage. So I've been looking forward to this chat with the both of you to learn more about the data space and how we can enable more of it, more better data as well, and what utilities as well are doing to harness all that data and work their magic and really drive the energy transition forward, drive energy security forward, and so forth. So welcome both of you to the show. And maybe to kick us off and maybe set the scene a little bit, Janet, I'll pick on you first. Maybe you can kick us off with, when it comes to data at the moment, give us an idea of, as the energy transition evolves, what does the current picture look like when it comes to the amount of data being collected by utilities? Is this a substantial undertaking? Set the scene for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I work at PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. Our service territory is quite large with over 70,000 square miles, serving over 16 million people. And it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of information and thus data that we need to ensure reliability and safety to our customers and those in our state that are impacted by our infrastructure. And someone jokingly at a conference earlier this year, a utility-focused conference, was like, wow, this feels like a data conference now. Everyone here is a software company focused in AI, or they want to help us organize and store and make actionable insights with our data. And we're like, yeah, that's the money. That's how we serve our customers and we keep up our infrastructure better. So on my end, I work as part of our aerial and specialized inspection program. So our data is all aerial focus, coming from primarily drones and helicopters, but also we utilize data that our company's collecting from our fixed-wing airplanes, as well as satellite data that we're receiving. And along with that, we have continuous monitoring data that's coming in from our cameras mounted on our towers and poles. So we have eyes and information on our assets like we never have before. And that's allowed us to not only have consistent monitoring and the ability to really understand what's happening at any point in time, but really making sure that we're making wiser and quicker decisions when we need to. And we couldn't do that without the data that we're collecting from these different sources, and really making sure that it's not only being collected, but being organized and being reviewed so that we're making those actionable insights in real time and with better information going out to our first responders and those that are going to be directly impacted with that information that we're collecting from the field.
It's funny you say that about the utility conference being like a data conference. I was at a motor show quite recently, and people were saying the same there, almost about how it's a big tech conference now rather than an engines and gearboxes show. So it shows how quickly the world is changing. But Mauricio, what's your kind of overall view on this to get us started about the amount of data being collected and how things are maybe evolving?
Well, definitely with the input of all this growth and demand on power, you see more and more automation coming. You see different technologies that are allowing the actual production of energies in a renewable fashion with solar farms, wind farms, and all that stuff. Create so much information for the utility to operate normally that actually completely shadows what they used to capture before. The growth of data has been exponential within the last few years. And now we're seeing even more because all these data centers that are being built and require so much power while trying to meet the demand that the actual grid already has and it's been stressed on. It's just putting more and more emphasis on communications, which actually turns into large amounts of data being now required. So again, the explanation is the growth of information is exponential from what we used to see, and it looks like it's just going to completely surpass what we see now. We're going to a point in which the utility will become a hyper connected grid of data plus electricity, and this is how we are seeing things. Partly with the research that Bell Labs has done, but also what we see from other utilities, not only in the States, but also around the world.
I mean, even on a personal level, when you see, 3 inboxes open, Slack, all the different Teams meetings and everything, or, that's quite overwhelming in terms of the amount of data we're exposed to as individuals. I mean, Janet, as a utility, does it risk becoming a bit overwhelming at the moment of the amount of data? I mean, you said there about all the planes flying, helicopters, drones. Is it difficult to wrangle all of that at the moment? And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, it can feel so, but also at the same time, it's this really great privilege that we have to understand and see what's happening in real time in at all hours of the day, and also be able to go back and refer to that data that's already been collected to make those better actionable insights. So when it comes to our aerial data collection, if it's being collected, we have to look at it, and that can be quite a large feat, but also it's better than us not having an understanding of what's out there. And at PG&E, ensuring that that information and data is being shared throughout an entire company is huge. We have a lot of internal employees as well as contractors that are supporting in our mission to provide safe and reliable power to all our customers. And at the end of the day, we rather have that data and information and have it stored and easily accessible. And knowing that we have folks out there looking at it and also really determining the quality of it to ensure that the future data that's being collected is usable and we're going in the right direction to make those correct insights.
And what about the wider picture, Mauricio? Do you see utilities kind of saying that they are on the cusp of being overwhelmed by that exponential data growth that you mentioned, or are they coping with it? What do you see as being the trend or the feeling at the moment in the wider sort of landscape?
So information deluge is what the term that I was sharing with many utilities for many years now. In some cases, there was just so much information that they could not really get the benefit of it. So I think that with some technologies that started back in the day with data warehousing, and now we're going to AI to actually facilitate and discern all the information, as Janet mentioned, all the aerial information they're capturing, they're going to use AI in order to basically exploit it the right way without having to basically lose the resources that are going to be evaluating those images from doing the operational tasks that they normally have to do. So the core of the business and utility is to maintain the power. It's not to look at or try to do data analysis, but more and more utilities are hiring data scientists and data analysis tools to try to basically make sense of the information that they have, and they have to do it in a reasonable amount of time because that information is relevant as soon as possible, right? So there's real time or near real time information that has to be analyzed, as well as in the case of PG&E, all that information needs to be analyzed and basically plans of maintenance have to be put on forth in order to actually do something before the next season of rains come, for example, or before something happens that is going to make things even worse. So I think utilities are trying to catch up with all the information that they have. Finally, there's tools that are allowing them to go and analyze them without having to spend too much time on them. But I think that's just going to continue being the norm, is that there will be always too much information. There's just not enough time to review it. And that's the reality, I believe.
It's fascinating to hear about how utilities are evolving like that and adding that kind of data analytics division to what they do. It reminds me of how some industries are having to diverse into, emissions trading or carbon trading, power trading as well when they have batteries, really having to learn new skills almost to keep up. And just a sort of thought there. You mentioned data warehousing there, Mauricio, and to any of our listeners that maybe aren't aware of that term, could you maybe just explain what that is and why it's kind of crucial to the conversation that we're having today?
Well, I think it's because the actual data that is being received, it has this temporal validity. And with that, you have to actually try to make as much of it as you can to make a decision at the time. So I think that's one of the key important things about using tools now that are going to allow you the analytics and the analysis of all that, because otherwise that information and that real valid data, once you get to it, it's already passed. You cannot do any actionable items or any actionable decisions on it. So I think that's why it's so important.
Mm-hmm. And Janet, when we're talking about maybe the risks or the lack of exploiting the benefits of sort of not keeping up with this information deluge that Mauricio mentioned there, could you maybe sort of spell out the risk that you'd like to avoid by not having too much data that you can't process? What would be the sort of the worst case scenarios, would you say, where data becomes too unwieldy?
Yeah, so our aerial program really took off in 2018. And since then, we're nearing nearly 3 terabytes of data. So millions and millions of photos of our overhead electric infrastructure. And before we were even getting to that point, we needed to make sure that all that information had a place to live, could be accessed by all of our internal employees or those that needed it. And that really came to having a single place for it to live and organized correctly. So with the growth of the data that we're covering, just from the aerial side of things, we now have a remote sensing data platform where all of our collected aerial data now has a single place to live, be stored and accessed, and most importantly, organized so that we know exactly what we're looking at and we can grab it when we need it and go back to those points in time and places that we need to go back to. Mm-hmm. If we didn't have that organization and that single place, it would be everywhere. It'd be imagine putting all those photos into a blender and being like, oh, what happened on that date in that location? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't help anyone. So making sure that organization is there and having a single place where folks can access it is essential in order to ensure that we are looking at everything that we're capturing. Because when we don't, those are when huge mistakes are missed and we're liable for those. So we need to make sure that we know how to access them. We're doing it in a way that is shared throughout the entire company, and we know exactly where to go, where to get that information, and in order for it to be extracted.
Mm-hmm. And as you move forward with this data storage and system, Janet, would you say that you're unlocking new ways of using this data as well, like new benefits that are cropping up from time to time that are unlocking new ways of doing things, perhaps, or is it just allowing you to do established things that work well, or are there new sort of avenues being opened up by this amount of data?
We are finding so many different ways to use it. So in particular, aerial data, it's the first time utilities, specifically drone data, we've seen a bird's eye view of our assets, which we learned through our pilot years gave us an advantage that we'd never seen before from the ground, which also came up with a lot of places where our systems were failing that we weren't able to catch before. So with that advantage and also having a single repository for all that information, we're able to help every single group within our company that interacts with our overhead electric system and also the roads, the vegetation, in order to get to those structures in one single place for them to view so that they can reduce the amount of times they have to send someone out in the field. to look at the same thing and also really understand what tools are necessary to work on those assets and maybe road conditions or veg issues that might be the case when trying to access those structures. So it really became this huge safety tool as well that we're able to have and allowed us to save money when it came to mobilizing crews to get information that in reality we already have because a picture says way more than a paragraph sentence that someone at that point in time is trying to gain insight from by visiting a structure. So having that all in one place allows our different groups within the company to see what they need to see and be more prepared when actions are needed.
Hmm. That's really interesting to hear how tangible looking at this data can be, and actually action in repairs, maintenance, and saving money as well. It's such interesting stuff. Mauricio, maybe what's your kind of view on the new ways of doing things by unlocking how this data is being used? Is that something that you're seeing more globally and wider as well, that people are discovering new applications for it? The more they organize it, the more they collect. What's your kind of view on that?
Oh, definitely. There's actually many ways in which the utility has found to improve their efficiencies by looking historical data, and that historical data typically covers telemetry on how things were done, so they can actually look at how things happened in the past, potentially do some forecasting, and use that information to see where things or how to actually better react when circumstances for demand and power are higher or lower. And that comes to from telemetry data only, right? This is the data that really is relevant at that moment in time, and that allows you to see what's the status of the grid. But in the case of having additional layers of information like pictures, for example, that obviously, as Janet mentioned, the benefit of it is now you have a view of your infrastructure in which you can definitely not only do preventive maintenance, but also you can see where you can actually put assets in a more efficient way, such that you can meet the requirements and the demands now that are happening more and more, and how to potentially use those for additional use cases. Think about the digital divide. And there was actually a lot of discussions on how utilities could help bring, especially during the COVID era, communications to those areas which had population but have very little coverage from carriers for normal type of internet service providers. So that type of visual information of where your assets are allowed some utilities to actually extend and be able to provide internet connectivity where the actual carriers couldn't, allowing people to at least stay connected during those times, and now looking into potentially extending that as a separate branch of the utility that supports the broadband, that supports the actual connectivity, reducing the digital divide. So that has nothing to do with the mandate of a utility, which is basically make sure that you provide power and interrupt it as much as you can. So that type of ability to analyze the information from multiple different dimensions and be able to look at it, from you can pivot whatever point of view you have on the same data set, allows those types of new use cases, those types of new applications, and definitely improvements on efficiencies and operations that you normally would have in a utility.
Hmm. You mentioned historical data there, Mauricio, and I just wondered when any new system comes along, it's always a bit of a rigmarole to get all the old filing cabinets in place to put it in the new system, whether or not you have to do that manually or automated. How easy is it? Is it a bit of a burden to use all of this old data and use it in the new system? Can it pollute the new system by not gelling well with the new stuff that's being collected? How much of a challenge is that, or can it be integrated kind of seamlessly?
Well, all of the above. I mean, everybody has all those challenges. Is how are you going to use that historical information that in some cases you have to keep because of compliance requirements? So utilities have to meet certain requirements and regulatory requirements, I should say, that make that information that you keep in any format available for any type of analysis, and for also showing that the utility really is doing what they need to do. They actually there's multiple bodies that regulate that at different levels, from a federal level to a local state level, as well as the public utility commissions that will always look at how the utility is performing. So the challenge is, how do you keep all that information? And that's, as Janet mentioned, is just obviously a procedure that you need to define and has to be evolved into making sure that now you know what information you have, where you have it, and potentially use offsite services and offsite companies that or consulting companies that are going to help you organize that information. It's a challenge. It's a big challenge because, like I mentioned before, information deluge is what happens, and sometimes you miss some of that information. So you have to keep track of all of it, and utilities have been doing their best with the ability without having to lose the vision of their core. The core is the utility, like you mentioned, like in all those competitions in cars, they use the data now, but before they were actually more worried about the actual performance of the machines. And the same thing happens with utilities. They have to be worried about the performance of the machines, but now they have to deal with this new additional layer of extra amount of information, and that's where the challenge comes in. So it's a challenge on an everyday basis, and how utilities are going to cope with that, how they're going to find the proper storage mechanisms that also comply with the regulatory requirements.
Yeah, to add to what Mauricio was saying, I think a lot of people are really gung ho of like, what's the price to collect all this data? What are all the tools needed? And then what is the price of organizing it? The big price tag is data storage. It's a lot of money. It's required. We need to be able to access it. We need to make sure like we can answer to our regulators, this is where it is. We can be able to extract it out. And it's not cheap, but it's a requirement that's put on us for good reason. And this includes not just old aerial data from 5 years ago, but this is data from, us highlighting maps out in the field of lines that we patrolled. Like we need to be able to go back to that information and have it in cold storage so that we know where we're coming from and ensure that we're not missing anything as we move into these new methods of data collection.
And it's fascinating to hear about this particular storage aspect of energy transition, because normally it's storing energy, obviously, but the fact that data is such a big part of this as well is it's really invaluable, I think, to bear all of this in mind. We've only mentioned it briefly so far, but artificial intelligence, AI, how is that kind of folded into what we're talking about here, and how much of a game changer is that? Janet, maybe kick us off. What kind of applications are AI being woven into what we've been talking about here, and is it making things easier? Is it changing the challenge? What's your experience of it so far?
Yeah, with AI, machine learning, and these different models that have been built and we're continuing to build, we have to incorporate it because of two things that are essential to utility. One, overall efficiency, and understanding and ensuring that our system is working and the folks that are in charge of it have the information that they need at the right time. And two, cost reduction. So we're collecting, thousands of images, but it takes someone a lot of time and they're required to go through every single photo. But if we're able to build the right models to know which of those 50 photos they need to see first, we're able to make those better decisions that need to be made sooner. So at this point, there's a lot of research within PG&E going towards AI, not just within the aerial department, but within all the different departments because of those two things again, cost efficiency and cost reduction and overall efficiency. But at this point, being in the utility, it's very much going to be a human in the loop design. We need to make sure that we still have our qualified trained professionals or qualified electricians that are out there making those decisions, but getting their hands on the data sooner and the right data at the right time. So it's in there. We're trying to further streamline those, but it's still in the works because there is a lot of risk in just relying on these tools, and also for good reason. A lot of trained professionals that have been this for a long time, and there's certain things that we just haven't been able to train a model yet on that they know from being out in the field and being around that live wire environment. So we're working towards it. Nothing quite sticking yet, but we know we need it to, and we know we have the right minds and brains. We're like PG&E is in Silicon Valley. There's going to be the right answer, but we're going to make sure we are testing the heck out of it to ensure that we're doing right by our customers.
Mm-hmm. And what's your experience of the AI role in all of this, Mauricio? Is it much the same or extra insight on that?
It's a bit different because if you think about the Gen AI that we normally see, it does require you to provide information and be able to get an answer. The challenges that utilities have is that the information that they have is confidential. It's under regulatory requirements. So they just cannot put up all that much data and try to process it with the ChatGPT or Claude or anywhere. They have to do it themselves. And that's where the challenge that Janet is they have to build the actual model that will meet those regulatory requirements. Everything has to be kept on site, or at least within the administrative domain of the utility, and anybody that has access has to prove that has the right permissions to do so. That puts a bit of a dent on the way that AI can operate, because now you are doing it with a couple of actual challenges there, that you cannot use all that infrastructure that's been built unless you come up and actually create specific requirements, or you get the services that are going to allow you to use that. But then comes in the other challenge that Janet mentioned. You have to do cost reduction. And if you're going to set up a special cloud to do the analysis on, say, OpenAI and Azure and Google Cloud anywhere, the amount of money you're going to pay on that one is much more than you probably would do if you actually do run it on a separate cloud internally within the utility. So you have to basically have a trade-off between those two. And that makes it such that the promise of AI, it is a challenge. And now if you take another step forward with agentic AI, that is something that's even more intrusive to actual operate the proper way. And intrusive, I mean, for any person that wants to use agentic AI, you have to give access to your calendar, to your email, to all of these things, including your credit card and financial information, such that you can rely on AI to do these things for you. In the utility, if you want to do that, you will be giving them the keys to the kingdom, which means that now there is a challenge there with potential access from, or even any breach that you can have on those agentic tools that could basically create chaos. So that is the reality. The reality is that you see all this AI being out there available for everybody, but utilities have to be very cautious on how to use those and have to analyze it, have to go through cycles, only to see that, yes, while we could get all the benefit out of it, because of our regulatory restrictions, we cannot really enjoy that. So it is a challenge. I don't think that that's going to be a showstopper for any of the activities, for example, but it just takes more work and it'll require more analysis internally for each of those utilities to get the true benefit of the AI that right now everybody says, oh, they are there, we can get them, right? So it's not as easy as in reality when you have those constraints.
It is reassuring to hear that the checks and balances are there and it is being taken seriously and responsibly. And yeah, obviously the narrative around AI, it's great to actually hear firsthand how it's being folded into the energy system. Maybe I could ask the both of you, this is obviously evolving very quickly and obviously the progress being made here, you said exponential growth there, Mauricio. What do you consider the next sort of steps of this process being? Is it just more of the same, more data, more being able to access it in a utilizable way? What do you see as the next big leaps forward here? And what do you expect to be the next big milestones that we could possibly see from this like data journey that you're on? Janet, what do you expect from the near to medium future of what we've been talking about here today?
Oh man. There's my far-reaching goals. So AI on the edge. What this data that we're collecting and these models that we're building, there's going to be a point where we're going to be able to make these actionable insights away from this warehousing and right there in the field. That's my dream because there's a lot of human error. We're humans, we're going to make mistakes. And so if there is a tool to help us while we're out there, ensure that we're not missing those vital checkpoints and answering those vital answers we need to make out there, that puts me at ease. That allows me to feel safe with the conditions that our field personnel are working out there, and also ensuring that we're getting all the information that we need back in the office. So that's like my far-reaching goal. In terms of right now, just the change detection AI models that we're building out, working towards those greater success rates, I think is on the near horizon. And it, again, we're not taking the people out of the process. It's very much a human in the loop design, but it's helping those that have to put their name to ensure that inspection is done. It ensures that they're feeling safer with those decisions being made and that they know they're not missing anything. So that's my near-term vision. And then further along, ensuring that the folks that are out there collecting our data out in the field also have similar tools to make more actionable insights and ensure that they feel safe with what they're sending back to the office and noticing while they're out there while collecting the data.
Oh, interesting stuff. What about you, Mauricio? How do you see this evolving?
I mentioned a term earlier in the discussion. I called it hyperconnected. And the hyperconnectivity is basically going to the point that Janet was just talking about, to do AI at the edge. And I think that from a communications perspective, that is something that everybody's trying to look at how we're going to achieve that and do it properly and do it in a cost-effective way. That is really the basis, because without data and without communications, you cannot have what Janet was mentioning, calling industrial AI. So we see that as the topic: industrial AI, collection, analysis at the edge, machine-to-machine communication, but truly to actually provide communication, not just data transfer, and decisions that could be made still without having to miss the human factor. So we see that the world is trying to push there. At the same time, we see that, and this is particular to utilities, there is a little more of a push for governance that doesn't exist right now in the rest of the world of AI. You see agentic AI is being deployed, everybody jumps on it, and they don't realize that there could be potential risks. They're not being aware of all that. And I think utilities have always been very good at trying to define those risks and identify those risks and limit what the exposure could be, and that they'll do it through data and AI governance. We see a lot of concepts and a lot of discussions being talked about it right now. Regulatory bodies are trying to follow what the utilities see as common sense, and they're probably going to build a framework around that. So that's the other push that I see from the AI explosion. It all will rely on communications, because the data that's being collected require controls that come from the governance, so that you can actually make the proper use of the technology and allow the automation that potentially is going to not only increase efficiency, reduce cost, and above all, make sure that everybody's safe. One of the key tenets in the utilities is safety of the members, safety of the people. There is no utility meeting that starts without a safety moment. That's because it's so ingrained with the utilities to have that. And that's something that I think in the end is going to drive how AI is going to be used within the utility sector in the future, obviously with an explosion of devices collecting and sharing data in the future. Not so distant, by the way, I don't think.
Exciting stuff, guys. We spend a lot of time here on the show talking about wind turbines, gas pipelines, nuclear reactors, and so on. But I do really think that topics like this are really what make the energy system tick along. And I always enjoy having these discussions with experts such as yourself that really explain them in a clear way. So thank you both of you for coming on the show today and giving us an insight into how utilities are approaching data, how AI is being fed into it, but not given the keys to the kingdom, as one of you said. So thank you both for your time. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Many thanks for joining me for this episode of Energy Enablers. If you have any thoughts or questions about the discussion today, please do get in touch via the usual channels. We're looking to produce more episodes of the show, including our daily podcast, The Jolt, about how access to data is either catalyzing or hindering the energy transition. So if you've got a story to tell, let me know. Stay tuned soon for another episode of the show, when we'll look once again at the people, policies, and technologies enabling our shift towards a decarbonized world. Please do join me then.